So tonight we're going to meander through spring, metaphorically looking at a number of wild plants that can be seen in the local region, going more or less in chronologic order, but with a few meanders. So when you think of spring flowers, you probably think of something like this, a beautiful old growth sugar maple carpeted in moss and lichens and red and white trilliums and maybe some Dutchman's breeches, squirrel corns, maybe something like that. Lots of flowers. So hepaticas, very early, beautiful flowers that can be quite abundant sometimes. So why are there lots of flowers in some sites and not so many in others? What are the differences about? Here you can see just about the maximum density of wild early spring native plants. So one factor is disturbance. Another factor is site characteristics, the inherent tendency toward site fertility. A deep gravelly substrate is always favorable. Long history of undisturbed condition. Here you see an old growth sugar maple stand, long undisturbed, inherently high quality site are important. The other thing is herbivory. Deer have gotten horrendously more abundant in recent decades, and they can make a huge difference. So if the deer herd is not hugely excessive, that's an important feature too.
Can you speak up more?
I can. Is the sound quality bad, or am I just not loud enough, Ken?
Sound quality is good, volume is low.
Okay, I wonder if there's a button for that. I will try to holler. So here is a very nice site, but not so dense with flowers here, probably because it's shady, lots of hemlocks. It is pretty undisturbed. Deer may be a factor. This is what you'd like to see. Is it better now, Ken? This is what you'd like to see. Really, really a lot of density of flowers. This is very satisfying somehow. This forest is over a particularly rich site. It's over a deep gravelly K moraine deposit with lots of limestone, but it's been worked on in recent years by many too many deer. Here's what the site looked like in the 1980s. And I also have a photograph by Vern Morton from about 100 years ago. And it really, the density of the white trilliums is indistinguishable from that of this 1980s picture of mine. But even steep, rocky hillsides with lots of cliffs and exposed rocks, if they're undisturbed, can have really a lot of things in flower, like this moss phlox. Now I'll go through and try to do some things in order. Skunk cabbage is really our earliest native plant to flower. It can happen in February, typically does, and it generates its own metabolic heat and often melts snow around it so it can peer through like this, which is really quite a fun thing. And it grows in swamps up through standing water. Quite miraculously, it even grows up through flowing streams. sometimes quite an amusing thing. Now I'll deal with some naturalized plants, some non-native species that can be found around that typically are a bit earlier than any of our natives, excepting skunk cabbage. This is winter aconite, Eranthus hyemalis, a plant native through much of Southern Europe and the Middle East, is popular as an ornamental. It is popular because it's so bright and cheerful and so early. It's really, apart from the skunk cabbage, it and silver maple trees are the earliest things to flower. Coltsfoot, Tussilago farfara, a European plant, a member of the Asteraceae, a composite, is showy, beautiful, a splendidly bright yellow and very early. The European Viola odorata, sweet violet, has a wonderful fragrance. It comes in this version and in a purple version. Notice that it's quite hairy in different places and differently so than our native violets, and it flowers quite a bit earlier than most of our native violets. If you look closely, and I don't know if you can here, the shape of the stamens and the stigma are very different than any of our native violets. If you look closely, you wouldn't mistake it. European Viola odorata. Daphne. In England, where it blooms in February, they call it February Daphne. For us, it would be April Daphne. Daphne Mezereum. Flowers often before the plant leaves out. Very early, very fragrant. This is a sessile trillium, one of the trilliums that is so called because the flower comes directly out of the top of the stem where the leaves diverge from the top of the stem without any flower stalk. There are a number of sessile trilliums, but this one is Trillium cuneatum from the Southern Appalachians, which is grown as a woodland garden plant here, and it becomes naturalized frequently. Oxlip, or in German, Himmelschlösung, the keys to heaven, is a beautiful little primrose from the mountains of Central Europe, which can become naturalized here. It's quite an attractive plant. Here is its close relative, cowslip, Primula veris, which is probably a lot better known. It used to be widely cultivated. You can still find it around a number of old house sites in the region. Beautiful little yellow primrose. Quite a few daffodils. This is one of the more fragrant and one of the more attractive species of daffodil. This is Narcissus poeticus, but daffodils frequently become naturalized, become spread into the wild. So now back to our native flora. One of the earliest woods flowers that the layman would think of as a flower is Sharp-lobed hepatica, early blooming. Certainly by early April, it's typically in bloom now. Comes in a variety of colors, pink, white, blue, purple, stripy sometimes. Beautiful. It flowers before the new leaves emerge. You can see the little furry new leaves unfolding in the base. Hepaticas are fun to look at. They like to turn down and protect themselves when it rains, so they don't get their pollen washed away and wasted. Sharp-lobed hepatica. Sharp-lobed hepatica. Notice the leaf shape. This is round-lobed hepatica, Hepatica americana. Now, sharp-lobed hepatica, it tends to be in rich soils, lower slopes, bottomlands. rich mesic woods. Round lobed hepatica tends to be in dry, rocky slopes, upper slopes, hilltops, open rocky woods, oak woods, drier, more acidic, more well-drained soils. And the round-lobed hepatica is the one that frequently has the deep blues and purples, the really striking colors. Though those can occur in the other hepatica, they're more typical of the round-lobed hepatica. Spring beauties, really true ephemerals. They're only visible for a few weeks. They come up, they flower, they photosynthesize, they go away. They rest for a long time, and then they come up the following year. This is the narrow-leaved spring beauty, Claytonia virginica, with longer, narrower leaves and longer, narrower petals, perhaps by a little bit. This is the other one, the Carolina spring beauty, with shorter, broader leaves. Notice that spring beauties have pink stamens. They also have pink pollen. And if you see a small early spring bee carrying a pink pollen load, you know where it's been. Trailing arbutus, Epigea repens, a low evergreen dwarf procumbent subshrub, a really long-lived, slow-growing plant. Very fragrant, very early blooming. Typically in bloom in the first half of April. Beautiful little plant. Bloodroot, everyone loves bloodroot, and it's so bright and cheerful and so striking. Sanguinaria canadensis, a member of the poppy family. Beautiful little plant. Now, a plant that is not as well known, in part because it's rare, at least in our area. Perhaps in some parts of the Ohio Valley, it's not rare. It's usually associated with limestone. Twin leaf, Jeffersonia diphylla in the Berberissaceae, the only plant named for Thomas Jefferson. Superficially looks quite a lot like bloodroot. If you look at the leaf shape, you would not be likely to confuse them. It's one of the few plants that has a leaf with two leaflets. Beautiful plant. The only complaining thing I ever hear anyone say about it is that the petals fall off after such a short time and do so easily. Trout lily, spring beauties, often they grow together and grow in great abundance and profusion. Beautiful little spring plants. Cut-leaf toothwort, Cardamine concatenata, very early spring ephemeral forest plant, a member of the mustard family. Purple cress, Cardamine douglasii, another member of the mustard family. Wild blue phlox, Phlox divaricata, a beautiful wild member of the phlox group. And it grows really in a variety of forest settings. You can see it growing here with some spring buttercup, some rue anemone, some mayapple in the back. This is a little later than the few preceding ones. Beautiful plant, such a lovely color. Trout lily, Erythronium americanum, is a beautiful wild lily, also called dogtooth lily. In fact, the European species is named Erythronium dens canis, literally dogtooth lily. This is Erythronium americanum, the native northeastern North American one. There are other species in North America, but this is the one that's common in our region. Beautiful plant. Notice the dark orange-brown anthers. There are some plants with pale anthers and some with dark anthers. You'll see both. Dutchman's breeches, Dicentra cucularia, a member of the Fumarioideae, the fumort group of the poppy family, bleeding hearts relative. Beautiful plant. Its close relative squirrel corn, Dicentra canadensis. Notice the strikingly different floral shape, despite the many similarities. Squirrel corn, Dutchman's breeches. Blue cohosh, Caulophyllum giganteum. There are two species. This is the earlier flowering and the more strikingly colored one. This is still intensely this blue purple color as it emerges. As the plant expands, the pigment gets diluted and it overall looks green later in the season when it's much bigger. Wild geranium, Geranium maculatum, member of the geranium family. Another really common, really widespread wildflower that blooms quite early. Woods, fields, roadsides, old fields, thickets, shrubs. Here's golden seal, Hydrastis canadensis, blooms a little later, maybe 2 weeks after the bloodroot and twin leaf. This is a rare native plant. It was already rare because it's really at the northern extreme of its range here, but made rarer by overharvest by herbalists to use it as an herbal medicine. The root is highly astringent and antibacterial and is very popular for a number of herbal uses. Golden seal, Hydrastis canadensis, a beautiful wild plant. So we'll do a few trees and shrubs. This is one of my favorite shrubs, and it is in the same family as the Daphne, the bright pink European plant we saw earlier. This is Dirca palustris in the Thymeliaceae, a native shrub of forests and swamps. Quite a beautiful plant, and the flowers are really attractive and interesting if you go close enough. Dirca palustris. Here's a viburnum, a native shrub of forests. This is usually in cooler sites like gorges, north-facing slopes, hilltops. Beautiful plant. Viburnum lanthanoides. Hobblebush, witch's hobble, so called because stems sometimes arch, bend down, and tip root, creating a thing that could trip you up. Hobblebush. Virginia bluebells. This is not really common in the Ithaca area. It, again, is more common farther south. It's near the northern limit of its range here. Mertensia virginica in the borage family, the boraginaceae. Notice how the flowers go from pink to blue as they go from bud to flower as they expand. The pigment is pH sensitive. It could be used as an indicator dye like litmus. It goes from pink to blue as the pH increases. Beautiful wild plant, very, very lovely. And like so many flowers that are blue or purple, if you look long enough, you'll find a white one. Apparently with a single gene mutation that is defective for producing the pigment. A member of the carrot or parsley family. This is golden Alexander's, Zizia aurea, a really common widespread early spring flower. A real favorite, everybody loves trilliums. White trillium, Trillium grandiflorum, the provincial flower of Ontario, and a really favorite plant. Red trillium, Trillium erectum. What you may not know is it's not always red. It can be other colors. Red trillium, Trillium erectum. And that name, erectum, only makes sense if you compare it to nodding trillium, where the flower hangs down below the leaves. This has a variety of colorful common names like nosebleeds and stinking Benjamin. It apparently has a fragrance that's designed to attract carrion eaters. Flies, ants, beetles are often the pollinators. Here's the straw yellow version. We tend to have only two colors here, this one and the red one. Farther south, it can also be found in pink and white. Here's one that's tending a little toward pink. I had to include this because I see that Audrey used a picture of this to produce the flyer for the talk. This is painted trillium, Trillium undulatum. Undulatum referring to the wavy edges of the petals. This is not common for us. It tends to be in cooler, more acid soil sites where the soils are more humusy and organic, sometimes associated with swamps or hemlock forests, cool hilltops, ravines, north-facing slopes. We do have it, but not a lot of it. Painted trillium. Wild ginger, Asarum canadense, a member of the Aristolochiaceae, a bizarre and interesting, mostly tropical family. This is one of our few representatives of that group, wild ginger. And the rhizome does have a ginger smell and flavor. Large flowered bellwort, Uvularia grandiflora, a beautiful early spring plant. A martyr to deer herbivory too, alas. I'm having PowerPoint problems. I hope they don't get worse. This is wood anemone, Anemone quinquifolia. Another beautiful little forest plant. It's a wee little guy. Beautiful, white flowers, 3 leaves of 3 to 5 leaflets each, and it spreads from an extensive runner and puts up lots of leaves, that shoots that won't flower in any given year, and those have 5 leaves of 1 leaf of 5 leaflets. Wood anemone. Here's the other toothwort. We had cut-leaf toothwort earlier, which flowers quite a bit earlier. This is 2-leaved toothwort, which confusingly has 2 leaves of 3 leaflets each. It does form hybrids with cut-leaf toothwort, which can be confusing to the inexperienced. This tends to grow in cooler, wetter sites than the other toothwort. Here you can see it growing in a big mat of Brachythecium rivulare, which tells you that it's a cool, wet, sepy spot. Notice how the flowers have 4 sepals and 4 petals and 6 stamens, 2 long ones and 4 short ones, like all other flowers of the mustard family. Rock saxifrage or early saxifrage. A beautiful little early spring plant, and this tends to grow in drier, rockier, steeper or higher landscapes, rocky open woods, oak woods, rock saxifrage, early saxifrage, Micranthes virginiensis. And now we'll have a few species that tend to be in drier, rockier, perhaps warmer, perhaps more open woods and slopes. This is plantain-leaved pussy toes, Antenaria plantaginifolia. This is a staminate individual, a male plant. Pussy toes are a whole clone of it, a whole patch will be either male or female, but not both at the same time. Here's moss phlox, a very beautiful wild plant that actually is native here, but it's also a plant that's widely cultivated as an ornamental. But unlike so many other species, this is where it comes from. This is where it's native, in our gorges and rocky slopes, steep west, southwest facing hillsides and gorge walls, dry open oak woods, moss phlox, Phlox subulata, ruinemone, Thalictrum thalictroides, or you may know it by the old name Anemonella thalictroides. Again, dry oak woods, beautiful little early spring plant, very cheerful. Ruinemone. Another pussy toes. This is common pussy toes, Antenaria neglecta. This is the female, the pistillate plants, and these are the staminate, the male plants. See their little stamens sticking out. Actually, in the Asteraceae, what looks like a single stamen is 5 stamens fused into a cylinder. So it's more complicated than it looks. That's why they're called composites, because there's more there than what first appears. It's another pistillate individual. Barren strawberry. Oops, I'm having a PowerPoint problem. I hope it doesn't get worse. Yeah, Geum Frigorioides or Waldsteinia frigorioides. You may know it by its old name. Again, dry, open woods, woods edges. Barren strawberry, so called, because it looks sort of like a strawberry plant, but it doesn't produce a fleshy berry-like edible fruit. Now, here's an example of some plants. Really, the leaves are a lot more fun than the flowers. This is rattlesnake weed or veined hawkweed. And this is one of our native hawkweeds, one of our native hieraceums, Hieracium venosum. Again, dry open woods, dry oak woods. Yellow pimpernel, Tenidia integerrima, again a plant of dry, rocky slopes, open woods, woods edges. Yellow flowers at the ends of these little rays of an umbel. An umbel is where a whole bunch of axes radiate out from a single point, typical of the carrot family, the Apiaceae. Four-leaved milkweed, Asclepias quadrifolia. Wild columbine, rock bells, meeting houses, has lots of colorful colloquial names. A plant that often grows right out of, seemingly out of bare rock on exposed cliffs, as well as in forests. A beautiful native plant. Fringed milkwort, gay wings, Polygaloides paucifolia or Polygala paucifolia. No, it's not an orchid. Yes, it's a milkwort, a beautiful native plant. Aromatic wintergreen, Gaultheria procumbens, an evergreen dwarf subshrub that appears like an herbaceous plant, but you look in the winter and it's still there. It hasn't died back. Now some trees and shrubs. Flowering dogwood, Cornus Florida. What look like big showy white petals are actually bracts, modified leaves, which subtend a cluster of small flowers. Beautiful native small tree. Where you find it in nature is in the understory of dry open oak woods, typically. Smooth shadbush, Amelanchier laevis. One of the more striking of the shad bushes are serviceberries, because the reddish bronzy young leaves against the white flowers make a very striking effect. Some of the other shad bushes, the young leaves are green or perhaps silvery from lots of fine velvety hairs covering them. Willows. Now, anything has flowers, practically speaking, unless it's a spore plant or a gymnosperm. So while you don't think of willows flowering, they certainly do. Here's a so-called pussy willow. This one actually is the pussy willow, Salix discolor, but most willows are shrubs. Only a few species actually are tree-sized, and most willows flower before they leaf out, and the young inflorescences have this pussy willow stage where they look like a little nubbin of silvery fur before the flowers expand. So this is the pistillate, the female flowers of the pussy willow, and here are the male flowers. So the female flowers consist of a single ovary with two little stigmas at the end and a bunch of hairs and a little brown scale subtending the whole works. The male flowers consist of 3 to 5 stamens and a bunch of hairs and a little scale at the bottom subtending the whole works. But they're quite showy and very attractive to insects, very important for early spring wild bees to gather their provisions. Red maple flowers actually are quite pretty. Too often they're not down where you can get a good look at them, but they're quite attractive. Box elder, another maple. None of these anthers have opened yet, but they will soon. Acer negundo, box elder. We have quite a few violets, so I'll go through some violets. This is the earliest one, round-leaved violet or early yellow violet. It's flowering now. Most of the other native violets are a bit later. This plant has a really interesting thing that it does that almost no other, certainly no other violets. Few other plants I know of do this. The leaves continue to get bigger throughout the growing season. Now these little leaves are maybe 3/4 of an inch across. It's a small plant, you know, the flowers are only an inch, inch and a half high. I've done some magnifying here, but this tiny leaf, which is, you know, maybe an inch across now, if it's a big one, can be 6 inches in diameter by the end of August. It continues to grow through the whole growing season. It's almost unique in that feature. Cute little plant. I'm having PowerPoint trouble. Okay, well, this is Canada violet, Viola. Oh, this is Canada violet, Viola canadensis. One of our larger and showier violets. The flowers they're often an inch across, and they're purpley on the back and bright white on the front with a yellow eye and dark lines on the lower petal. It tends to be in richer, limier sites, often over limestone. Definitely a good indicator of high fertility sites. Long spurred violet, Viola rostrata. Hairy yellow violet, notice the hairs, Viola pubescens. Marsh blue violet or swamp blue violet, Viola cuculata. The thing to notice about this species is the flowers are about twice as high as the leaves. Not so the common blue violet, Viola sororia. This is one of our most common native wild plants. Practically everyone's lawn, unless they assiduously poison it, has a bunch of this in it. It's literally everywhere. You could start from anywhere and you wouldn't have to go far to find one. Common blue violet, Viola sororia. Northern white violet. This is a tiny little plant. Here it is growing on the sides of a Carex stricta hummock in a cedar swamp, and I photographed it from canoe. Northern white violet, Viola pallens, beautiful little plant. Selkirk's violet, Viola selkirkii. This one has no close relatives. Of our native violets, it's the most different from all the others. Its close relatives are in Eastern Asia, and it has this large flattened spur. The shape of the leaf teeth is very different from any of the other of our native violets. If you look close, you can see there are little white hairs all over the upper leaf surface, about 1 millimeter long, that stand straight up. Has a number of features that are very different than any of our other native violets. And yes, it's rare. It's not easy to find locally. Now, there are a lot of nondescript plants that people don't readily identify. A lot of flowers are not colorful and showy. This is an example of that. This is hooked buttercup, Ranunculus recurvatus. It's a common native wild plant in forests and thickets and old fields and shrubs. Once you know what it looks like, you'll start seeing it everywhere, but it's not showy or colorful. Here's a pretty native wild plant, not striking or colorful, but beautiful nonetheless. This is starry woodrush or hairy woodrush, Lizula acuminata. It's a member of the rush family, a grass-like plant, but not closely related to the grasses. If you look, you'll see this in forests everywhere. It's not an uncommon plant. Now let's deal with some wetland plants and sites. Here you have a beautiful undisturbed hemlock, red maple, yellow birch, black ash swamp. You can see a yellow birch with its frizzy bark in the foreground. Lots of cinnamon fern, some white and black ash, lots of cinnamon fern. Somewhere in the way back, you can see something pink in flower that might be interesting. Here you can see a lot of marsh marigold, this yellow flower plant in the foreground, a member of the buttercup family, the Ranunculaceae, a beautiful wild plant, very colorful flowers. The leaves were eaten by early settlers and Native Americans, but you have to pick it early and treat them properly or they're quite poisonous, so I won't recommend it. Here is American globeflower, Trallius laxus, which is a rare plant that is in a number of fens and swamps locally. It likes openings in cool groundwater fed swamps or wetlands called fens that are watered by emerging cold mineralized groundwater, but have a quite open tree canopy and a rather low nutrient availability. Beautiful early spring blooming plant, American globe flower, Trallius laxus. Here's our native wild iris, Iris versicolor, another swamp dweller. Canada lily, Lilium canadense, a beautiful native wild lily, certainly colorful and striking. So here is a floating ridge fen, a floating peatland. You can see lots of sedges, lots of royal fern, standing water pools, a pitcher plant in full bloom, quite a beautiful plant. This is our native northeastern North American pitcher plant, Sarracenia purpurea. Uh-oh, I'm having PowerPoint problems again. Sometimes called side saddle flower. I don't know why, but it is an odd flower, a very unusual flower structure. Very unusual leaves shaped like a water jug. They catch water, drown insects, and some nutrients can be absorbed and used to benefit the plant. Here's our native pink azalea, Rhododendron priniphyllum, sometimes called pinkster flower. Very fragrant, reminiscent of cloves and cinnamon and vanilla. A number of orchids actually grow in the local region. This may be one of the more familiar ones, the pink lady slipper, Cypripedium acali. The larger yellow lady slipper, Cypripedium parviflorum, variety pubescens. Now, this is the larger yellow lady slipper. Now, the yellow part, the asymmetric petal that looks like a shoe, is about 1.5 inches long in this plant. This is the smaller yellow lady slipper, Cypripedium parviflorum, variety moccasin, amusingly. Now this, the lip, the yellow part, is about half the size of the larger one, even though I haven't photographed them in a way that shows that scale. Here's the smaller one again. Very beautiful native wild plants. Showy lady slipper, Cypripedium reginae. Definitely a favorite wild plant. Showy orchis, Galliaris spectabilis, a plant that's now very rare in the region. It wasn't so, but the deer have literally eaten almost all of it. They seem to have a preference for orchids and lilies. So do people, but at least we don't eat them. Beautiful wild native orchid. Here's a really odd, a really funny looking little green and brown orchid. Whorled Pogonia, Isotria verticillata. Here it is in flower bud. Here it is wide open. It has the unusual habit of growing both in acid swamps with lots of sphagnum and dry upland oak woods. Don't ask me why, but it is a very fun little plant. Such an odd looking one. Here's one of the more beautiful flowers, swamp pink or dragon's mouth orchid, Erethusa bulbosa. Here's another wild orchid that grows in bogs, grass pink orchid, Calopogon tuberosus. Another little pink orchid that grows in bogs, rose pogonia, Pogonia ophioglossoides, which means it looks like Ophioglossum. And the leaf rather does resemble an adder's tongue fern, Ophioglossum pusillum. Now, there's one very odd feature of our local region, which is the South Hill Plateau, which is an area uphill of Ithaca College that was washed over by an enormous flow of glacial meltwater, which scoured off all the glacial till and bared it down to bedrock. And the resulting habitat is practically unique in the region, and it gives us some plants that we otherwise don't see in the local area, like these bluets, these little Quaker ladies, the little four-petaled rubiaceous blue flowers with the yellow eye, Houstonia cerulea, bluets. And down in the bottom, you can see some Sphagnum compactum, and this is the only site in the region for Sphagnum compactum. And also, this rare dwarf cherry is in the local region, only found in that one site, Prunus susquehannae. So, at the end of spring, we come to summer flowers like this beautiful purple flowering raspberry, Rubus odoratus. And so ends the talk. Thank you.